Gerry Mulligan was this great baritone player who's white, he's young, he's very good looking, and he's got this new sound. And it was a lot of things fell in place. It happened at the right time.
P-I-T-A, we call it PITA, pain in the ass. He could be. I mean, he just was capable of expressing all his neurotic tendencies in public if he was rubbed wrong.
Oh, he was an egomaniac. But very likable. But I think that was part of what gave him that star quality.
Gerry Mulligan was young, gifted, and white. His sharp suits and chiseled good looks made him one of the first sex symbols of modern jazz. A white musician who created his own style in the predominantly black jazz scene, Mulligan brought a new light sound to the heavy baritone sax and brought jazz to a new generation of fans. Mulligan defined the sound and the style of the early 50s.
Gerry was the right musician at the right time. He played a cool style of music that was somewhat antithetical to the complexity and the rigors of bebop. And this was very appealing, especially to young people who found the earlier music a little bit complicated. And also he was attractive, he was personally appealing, he was unusual looking, tall, lean, redhead, very introverted on the bandstand, and not so much off the bandstand. And he was white, and that didn't hurt, especially in California.
A lot of hype got involved in this. In this period, it was a very unfortunate, but the marketing people were setting up an opposition between West Coast cool white jazz as opposed to East Coast black hot jazz, bebop. Stronger, driving, more forceful kind of jazz as opposed to a more cerebral, thoughtful, more carefully worked out kind of jazz. Now, the fact of the matter is, two of the leading figures in cool jazz were John Lewis with the Modern Jazz Quartet, who was black, and Miles Davis, who was black. This black-white opposition thing just doesn't work, and neither does the East Coast-West Coast thing.
Gerry Mulligan was born in New York in 1927. He started out as a composer and arranger with the big bands on the East Coast, but his music would become the sound of the jazz that blossomed on the opposite coast over 20 years later.
Sound and with cool jazz, and you know, the place where that word found most of its home was obviously with the jazz coming out of Los Angeles in the 50s. The focal point of that was the Chet Baker, Gerry Mulligan pianoless quartet. And it was deliberately quieter and it was more controlled. So people started to call this cool jazz, and because they associated it with the sunshine of the West Coast and the idea of people moving at a slower rate, the whole thing became synonymous with sunshine and also with the Hollywood look. And then added to this, you've got, Chet Baker with his fabulous James Dean looks and his quiffs and whatever. Gerry Mulligan, he's like the tall, thin guy next to him. He's got this Jerry Lewis haircut. He's wearing these cool clothes. It was very Hollywood. It was very 50s.
From that kind of music, that cool, laid-back legato style, a cool attitude developed, a cool way of speaking, a cool way of dressing. And so people started to think of jazz in terms of being hip or cool.
It was a time where jazz musicians were starting to become celebrities, and you know, the media was looking to people like Gerry Mulligan, and the people like that were actually starting to get in on TV shows and on the front covers of magazines. I mean, Gerry Mulligan was a great baritone player, but he was very photogenic as well.
His good looks attracted publicity, but it was Mulligan's swinging music and new sound on the baritone that won over the fans. The baritone was the wallflower of the sax range, stuck blowing the bass notes in the big bands until Mulligan gave it its own light voice.
Mulligan was the first one who really popularized it as a solo instrument, and his style is very much based on the tenor style of Lester Young, which is quite a cool approach, quite laid back and relaxed, yet at times then he adds a sort of rhythmic aggressiveness to it.
Lester Young was a jazz giant of the 30s. He played the tenor sax, which, unlike the bulky baritone, dominated jazz in the 30s and 40s. Young is now hailed as one of the early architects of the cool sound.
You know, and it was just light and airy and just on top of, soaring above everything. And what Mulligan did was to pretty much take that same soaring and melodic playing and just transfer it over to baritone. So you have like
As to how he achieved it, well, I think it's a great deal to do with the facial structure, the way that the bones in the face are, and the sinus. I think if you look at Mulligan's face, you've got a very firm, strong jawline and lots of control over the instrument, and that's what you really need. You need to be in control of the baritone.
Gerry Mulligan's music in that period was very controlled. I mean, intonation was so exactly precise. Nobody ever wandered out of tune even slightly, even for effect. And the pieces were composed with very decisive chord progressions, and the harmonies were very decisive and finite. And so there was a feeling of control, laid back, hip, a little bit alienated, but also very much in control.
it's definitely laid back, sensuous, Sometimes a whole lot of individuals think that it's void of feeling because it's not just jumping around, just, you know, folks have to, you know, think of it as somebody shuffling their feet around, just, you know, and it's not that at all. I mean, it takes a different type of intensity to play that, but at the same time, you have the same, if not more, conviction to play that.
New York was where many of the founders of the cool movement created the legendary Birth of the Cool group in 1948. This 9-piece group mixed classical musical techniques with jazz. They formed what was in effect a jazz chamber orchestra. The band was fronted by the trumpeter Miles Davis. Gerry Mulligan played the baritone. Other members included the composer Gil Evans and the sax player Lee Konitz.
Gerry did most of the writing. He wasn't given full credit for that, and he was, I think, a little bit annoyed, as was his wont. He could be very easily upset by things that didn't go according to plan. But he was a very musical guy and very instrumental in that whole thing working, I think. And I thought of it in some way as his band, yeah.
Miles was not above claiming other people's work. He was rather known for it. He claims in his book that the Birth of the Cool operation was his, that it was his band, and that he was the driving force behind it. Now, none of this was true. But he was an aggressive guy, and he went out and got a gig for the band. And if you get the gig, it's your band. So it was the Miles Davis Nonet. And then he went out and got a record date. And if it's your record date, it's your band. So his name went on this group, even though most of the musical ideas had not come from him, but had come from Gil Evans and Gerry Mulligan. And some of Mulligan's best early compositions, like Jeru, came out of those sessions.
The Birth of the Cool broke up after a few recordings, but Mulligan would use the chamber group experience later. Broke and out of work, Mulligan left New York and hitchhiked his way out west. It was 1952, and his luck was about to change. America's West Coast in the early 1950s was the center for much of the new cool school of music. It was here in 1952 that Mulligan met the handsome trumpeter Chet Baker and formed a chamber group, a quartet, with the then novel idea of playing without a piano.
The quartet kind of started accidentally. They were playing on a small bandstand, didn't have room for a piano, whatever. And they just hit immediately, and then Time magazine did an article about them, and then virtually overnight everybody was talking about the Gerry Mulligan Quartet. And then Chet Baker was a movie star kind of glamour about him, and just the whole thing was the right group at the right time.
The quartet's versions of standard tunes, like My Funny Valentine, led to the setting up of a new record label, Pacific Jazz, and West Coast Jazz was born. Mulligan's swinging tunes were an immediate hit with a new white generation of fans.
Pacific Jazz, which was a label that Chet and Gerry recorded for, which was launched specifically for their records, were very, very good at these kind of cool West Coast images, and they presented the music in that way. It made it desirable, you know, like college kids wanted to look like Chet and Gerry, you know, they wanted to hang out with these guys, and so vis-a-vis they would take the records home and play them and dream about being a cool West Coast musician.
In the history of American entertainment, including jazz, it usually takes a white musician, or it had, not so much now, but for a long time it usually took a white musician playing black music to be able to bring that music to a mass audience. The obvious examples would be Benny Goodman, Elvis Presley, Bing Crosby, many others. And I think that, especially in California and Los Angeles at that time, white high school kids and college kids coming to a club would have identified more with somebody like Gerry and Chet.
The Mulligan-Baker Quartet lasted only a year, but Mulligan's decision to sideline the piano, the main harmonic instrument in jazz bands, was a style he would repeat with other chamber groups.
There was just the trumpet and the baritone, bass player and drums. So that meant there was no harmony left in the music. It was just about lines.
My job is to play a note on every beat that establishes the basic harmonic structure of the song. And on that, the other two horn players can build their own melodies and their own counterlines.
When the trumpet player is playing a solo, bass player is playing, he'll play small figures such as we were then able to hear the way that Mulligan could contribute to the ensemble using basically a technique called counterpoint. Counterpoint, like briefly explained, I mean, if we assume that you've got a melody line, then if we add a bass line, it becomes a counterpoint to that. It changes the melody.
It's the two instruments who are having this sort of dialogue between each other. Rather than have the dialogue with the rhythm section, they're actually having a dialogue with each other as horn players. No one had had that sound before. It was a completely new sound.
Mulligan's career nearly fell apart in 1952 when he was arrested on drug charges. He was busted with Chet Baker after one of their gigs. Baker was let off, but Mulligan spent 3 months in prison. It was the end of the quartet, and Mulligan had to undergo cold turkey behind bars.
Gerry got involved with drugs the same time that whole generation did. Drugs were like an unknown quantity that promised the moon. And everybody tried it out. And some people got stuck with it. You know, some people died.
In the 50s, there was loads of high-profile busts. You know, Gerry Mulligan got busted, Art Pepper, loads of the musicians, and it was part of the whole club culture, part of the images. You know, they're playing in clubs where maybe there was a lot of pushers, a lot of pimps. You know, those are the people who opened and ran the clubs. So it became a kind of heroin chic became associated with the music. Now, obviously, that isn't the case anymore. But maybe at that time it gave it an edge, a danger, something like rock music has now.
But in 50s Hollywood, jazz had become a byword for sleaze. Gerry's celebrity led to small roles in films. He played in the opening scenes of the film noir, I Want to Live. The film is about a good-time girl, a Mulligan fan, who ends up on death row.
The way jazz musicians were characterized is that they were part of a seedy kind of subterranean life, which was just so offensive to everybody. I mean, Gerry had his problems, but to always portray jazz musicians as in a little corner in a dark club that's populated almost exclusively by prostitutes, grifters, and drug addicts, that's a myth that's been going on for a long time. For years, whenever you'd see a prostitute on the screen in the background, you'd hear an alto or a tenor saxophone going, wah, you know, they're playing a big, silly glissando. And that really hasn't changed. People, for some reason, Hollywood is the last community that is really attached to this idea that jazz musicians are somehow associated with all kinds of sleazy, you know, self-denigrating behavior.
Mulligan's film career was brief, but the money helped to finance his bands. By the end of the 50s, cool was over. Mulligan, who never considered himself a cool musician, played with artists from Duke Ellington to Thelonious Monk. His next innovation came in 1960, when he started a jazz chamber orchestra, the Concert Jazz Band.
This was at a time when big bands were virtually dead because you couldn't afford to do it. And he got a record company behind him, and he put together the best musicians in New York City. He called it the Concert Jazz Band to underscore the fact that this was not a band for dancing. This was not that kind of an orchestra. This was concert music written for the classic instrumentation of brasses, reeds, rhythm. It's an American invention, the big band.
But the Concert Jazz Band was too expensive to maintain, and it folded in 1964. By then, a new era of music had dawned.
Gerry didn't know how to deal with what was going on in the 60s. I mean, on the one side, you had rock, which was bursting forth in a way that it never had before after the Beatles, and had a complete hegemony on young people. And on the other hand, jazz was in the period of the avant-garde. Now, Gerry is a melodist. First and foremost, he's a lyrical player. And so here, this great melodist is caught between rock and roll, which he despises, and the avant-garde, which is completely incomprehensible to him. So he starts making a series of unfortunate recordings where he tries to kind of do jazz versions of pop tunes of the period. Well, that kind of thing never really works. And so he was really in the wilderness for several years.
Until his death in 1996, Mulligan adapted to different musical fashions. He played with Dave Brubeck, another cool school veteran. He formed a jazz fusion band called the Age of Steam, dabbled in Latin American music, and worked with the pop singer Barry Manilow.
I think he wanted to be a Cole Porter, for example. He resented the fact that he wasn't accepted on the same basis as some of our great writers of pop tunes. And he was trying more and more to write that kind of material instead of the more jazz kind of tunes. I think that was part of it. I think that he got caught up in the world of celebrity, but it was a fact that his music wasn't as effective as it was earlier.
Mulligan remains a groundbreaking artist in jazz. He proved you don't have to play loud to be hot. He gave his uniquely cool sound to the very uncool baritone and brought jazz to a new audience. After Gerry Mulligan, jazz would never again be so accessible.